Psychotechnologies Live. Welcome to a super very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have a guest, Romeo Stevens. Romeo Stevens he's like a big name in our circles. He runs the Metaphysicians Without Borders.
Doesn't know how big a name he is.
Yeah, I guess that is surprising to him, but I'm glad I'm the first to be able to share that information with you. He runs the Metaphysicians Without Borders email chain or whatever. That's
the mailing list.
The mailing list. That's what it's called. That I believe that's where Elliot and I first met.
Yeah.
As well as I've met some other people off of that. So thank you very much for creating that communal resource.
Yeah, I think you were asking me about jhanas or something, and then I was like, "Let me show you," and that's where we met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Through a couple exercises, and then we were off.
Yeah, when I was like first getting started, I'm like, "Oh, this stuff is so cool," but I don't know anyone that does it. And then Ahan introduced me to the mailing list, and then I was just like paying attention to it. And then every time someone's like, "Hey, do you want to talk? Does anyone want to do this thing?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And then that's how I like kind of got started and met people. So thank you. That really helped me with my journey. So you're doing this thing called core transformation, which sounds like a cool psychotechnology. What is it? And can we do a little bit of
that? Doing it live is a little bit fraught. It usually takes about 90 minutes at least. And the first session that a person does is usually very much spaghetti code. But to give a short overview of what it is, my understanding, I still need to investigate this a bit more. My understanding is that just like with yoga and other things, there are Western rediscoveries of the same basic underlying patterns. I do not know the degree to which Connierae Andreas and her sister and husband were familiar with other practices. There's quite a bit of information in her book. It's called Core Transformation, the book, by the way. That's where the name comes from. The full sort of way it was developed, but she did work for quite a few years on it. So there was quite a bit of an independent rediscovery. But my understanding is that it is very, very close to a Tibetan practice. And them being close is not surprising if they're both sort of poking at a core truth or data structure in the human mind, as I believe they are. Because there's always the created versus discovered distinction in these sorts of psychotechnologies, which is a whole rabbit hole that maybe we'll get into at some point. But to not get sidetracked, yes, core transformation. The Tibetan practice, the other translation of what it is by Lars Short is aspirational inquiry. And what that means is it's a process of investigating the intentional content underlying how we represent our own experience to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And then understanding that there's conflicts within that those aspirations. And then slowly picking apart the spaghetti code of those intentions and resulting in a much cleaner laminar flow to the energies of different mental parts that might be attempting to accomplish goals for you. And the reason Connierae Andreas called this core transformation is that when you do this process correctly all the way to the end, you seem to fall into what she calls core states. And these are states that many spiritual traditions aim at, because the sorts of words people use to describe the state when you ask them, wholeness, beingness, peacefulness, oneness, lovingness, various extremely purified states of direct experience of what you truly value. So you can imagine that this is quite it can be quite an intense experience. In the context of a sorry, go ahead.
I just because like you've been saying a lot of stuff, it's very dense. Do you mind if I just reflect it back at you, see if I've got it? So we do a lot of stuff for a lot of reasons, and core transformation kind of is to get to the core like intention behind the reason why we do all those things. And so those states wind up being like esoteric, pure states that also show up in Eastern traditions as, you know, almost ends of themselves or focuses of practice. And so core transformation is trying to I guess reify, or you're saying like creating the laminar flow, so like a more smooth output or more smooth journey from these more base motivations, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Sorry, continue.
So, well, yeah, as you alluded to, these wind up being the states of investigation or useful things that are used in meditation practices. So most people are familiar with concentration practice as
Samadhi?
Oh, that's something where you pay attention to the breath and you all the attention on the breath and you become absorbed in the breath and something magical happens. Well, the breath is just one object that you can take as your meditation object. And my understanding and experience is most people have a dramatically easier time taking one of these core values they actually have as a meditation object rather than the breath. The breath winds up being a bit of a weird object. Now, the breath is super useful. There's really interesting things, but it maybe not is not the best for people to start off with. It's a little too esoteric in certain ways. It is nice in a certain way. It has nice properties. There's stuff going on, but yeah, going straight for what people actually care about seems to be more effective. And if people can experience that as rewarding, then they're going to have a much easier time sort of feeling motivated in their practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. Where like I don't often in my practice wanted to focus on the breath because like that feels like a waste of attention and stuff. Like it doesn't seem that important. And so to have these other things that I'm like, no, these are the things that are actually important. These things are actually affecting my life. And to have that focus, to be able to focus on that, it made it easier for me to want to do the practice and to want to enter into the work. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of these kind of stuff going around where you know, we have breath, but we have like casino practice where it's like focusing on, you know, the fire. And then I think that's the only ones we've covered so far. But yeah, it would be cool to hear more. Like what are some popular ones that people like to do?
I'm trying to remember which book I found it in, but there was some. It might have been Dan Brown, it might have been Daniel Ingram, but he talked about going from concrete object to subtle object to very subtle object. Like you start with staring at a flame or staring at a seed or staring at a rock, and then you close your eyes and you imagine the same rock, or you stare at a statue of the Buddha and then you close your eyes and you imagine the Buddha, and then like you move to the very, very subtle of like the essence of Buddha without imagining your little Buddha and without looking at your concrete Buddha. The thing you're describing of like using a concrete, using a core state seems to go for the very, very subtle to start with. This is, I mean, the point of this practice was starting it with the concrete, which is kind of easier to grasp for a beginner, and then moving to the very subtle, or like starting with looking at the thing and then moving to the visual field, and then moving to the awareness in which the visual field lies, in which we look at the thing. This is a like stepping back into the greater awareness consciousness as a method, because concrete is a lot easier than these, but you're sort of proposing that these very subtle ones are like people can find them very easily, or?
Well, it's tricky. Connierae did wind up inventing another technique for people who were highly resistant to core transformation for whatever reason, called Coming to Wholeness. That's her other book. And that also is adjunct to several contemplative practices. And it is an awareness-based practices of sort of stepping back and then just observing the whole field. So there's going both up and down the stack, and both of those are valuable skills. And with core transformation, it's a whole process for the person to learn how to, and that's actually part of the point of it, is you start with any kind of arbitrary material, any mental material, experiences you're having or have had in the past that you find problematic for some reason, and you cut down through the layers to more and more, I guess more and more subtle, you could say, but more abstracted in a certain way. But in another way, more concrete, it's very hard to define the dimensionality of what's happening with the mental process. But yeah, part of the reason it's called core transformation is also is that there's a core states, but then this process of dozens or hundreds of times tracing out from the sort of gross motivation to the subtle or underlying motivation trains some sort of little mental module to be able to do that. And it becomes much easier to perceive your own motivations and other people's motivations. And when you can see the underlying positive intention of your own conflicting motivations, what were previously conflicting motivations, and that's the exact same as seeing your conflicting motivations with another person's conflicting motivations. And so when you train that skill of seeing the underlying unity, it just makes everything easier internally and externally.
So you like wind up you wind up like everyone being in like this good faith, good intention place versus the place of conflict.
Yeah.
Sounds like I've done possibly something similar with internal family systems therapy, that there's a couple of mental moves down the J. Early process of internal family systems of like offer the part appreciation, and then be curious about what the part wants, and then ask it like, what do you want, what are you trying to do? And like each of these is like a mental moment, right? I'm going to do this question, and then I'm going to like offer it appreciation for its response, and it's like a little dance. And I kind of tried to get that process into like moment by moment, like subtle, like relational, like tick tick tick. And then one day I was like early in the morning, half asleep, half dreaming, and I realized I was doing IFS in my dreams. It's like there's some sort of part there, and I was like, oh, this part needs this, and I was like, it's dreamland, right? So you can kind of like woof and give the part the thing, and then the part does the thing and have a good time, and then like step back out. Okay, that worked. Come back in, like, oh, it's not really working. Step back out. Oh, it actually needs some more of this. Like, oh, I guess I trained that like internal mental module quite well to just carry it out naturally. Got lucky with that one. I don't do that in my dreams every night, but that was just like one off. I found this dream where I was definitely doing some internal family systems in my dream. I don't know. Do you do core transformations in your dreams?
Yeah, it definitely comes up. So dream characters will come with content, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That sounds like undigested stuff. And so you do a little bit of whatever moves are available, you remember in that sort of vague hypnagogic state. If you can also remember to meditate or do yoga in dreams, that winds up being extremely effective. So yeah.
Is there, I mean, like, do you have a like list of other dream opportunities, like remember to fly, remember to
Meditating is definitely crazier than flying in dreams. It's like much more powerful than normal.
Interesting. Because there's I'm just gonna like pull bits from all of the meditative practices I've done. One of the pieces of the Finders course was they got you to do body scans, right? But a tricky thing happens when you do body scans is that you're not really scanning your body, you're sort of scanning a mental map that is abstracted from the body. And they really wanted you to like scan the actual body rather than this mental map body, because the actual body has the map is like a lazy abstraction and like stores silly like simple abstraction, whereas the body is where the stuff is kind of really stored. And they wanted you to keep going back to like double check if you're like putting yourself in the map and put yourself back into territory, which I thought was really interesting. But actually you're describing that in the dream you have much more power, or like in the map you have much more power, but obviously power over the map, not power over the territory, right?
Yeah, I mean, at a certain level, it's going to be experiences all the way down. So it's a matter of how well those experiences are tightly informationally coupled with the presumably external world.
Right. I guess in a dream you can win everything and then wake up and go like, oh, I didn't win everything. I need to still do my day.
And my read of the discussions of the powers in the Pali canon indicate to me that it's a discussion of yogic practices that allow you to do sort of waking lucid dreaming, because the Buddha reports that the powers, while interesting and potentially useful for practice, don't have any causal interaction with reality at large, which is, obviously at odds with a lot of the traditional descriptions.
By power, which power?
What does that mean?
Something like
the psychic powers that are described.
like mind reading should have an interaction with reality, but
Well,
like
it would make sense if you were
teleportation.
dreaming and you were able to psychically communicate with your dream characters.
Right.
That
Right.
it might all feel very real,
Right.
and maybe it would even have implications for your practice, right? If you learn, especially if you, as we're just discussing, doing IFS, you like learn new things about your own psyche that are new information to you. In some sense, it's not new information to you because it was already internal to you, but like it's consciously new to you. But yeah, this is the most parsimonious explanation of the powers that I understand.
I mean, some of the powers seem like physics breaking to me, right?
Well, exactly. You can fly in your dreams.
Teleport, but some of the powers seem like highly improbable but still possible. Like some of the mind reading feels maybe not physics breaking, just like really strong intuition.
Yes, I think that you can gain dramatically more information from people's nonverbal communication than is typically understood.
Right.
I think extremely good therapists and etc. are able to do this, and practitioners. Yeah, I consider that separate. I think that gets mixed together with the cities, but yeah, I consider it separate.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's saying like these are the like supernatural powers and these are the like possibly doable but kind of unlikely powers. Would be nice to have. All right, so what's the new thing? You said there's a new part of core transformation that you are exploring or trying out.
Oh, it's very preliminary. I mean, sort of doesn't exist yet. But myself and several other people who are really interested in core transformation feel like there's more there. There's potentially, even if it's just better reifying the pedagogical structure, because that doesn't just have external implications of like, oh yeah, you could like reach more people and maybe like you can help more mentally ill people. Maybe you have simpler instructions, maybe younger kids, maybe blah, blah, blah. That's all well and good. But, as we were just talking about, there's no true external internal distinction. So learning to teach it better to other people is also learning to teach it better to your own parts that aren't necessarily amenable to whatever logical arguments or emotional moves you've already learned. So there's some like, there's a lot of moves within the sort of overall framework of core transformation. There's still a bunch of minor moves, and it's not clear like mapping out what the most useful ones are and how to train them directly would be probably helpful. So there's some ongoing stuff in that direction.
So that's really cool. That kind of like is bringing up where I'd like to go, which is like, how are you sort of like the overall arching view of it? Like, how is it that you would like you've given the explanations of what it is, but how are you like kind of thinking about it? How are you creating that container that contains the core transformation?
Well, I'm coming at it from a perspective of concentration as a starting practice is usually kind of a crapshoot for most people. And people can spend years sort of fruitlessly practicing and not really seeing much result and feeling like they're doing something wrong or not really understanding what's going on, sort of beating their head against a wall. Similarly, insight practices, when taken as the primary starting practice, can tend to be a little bit harsh and destabilizing, and also sort of metaphysically confusing to people. And also the instructions quickly, that's a whole rabbit hole. I'll just say, of the three, concentration, insight, and integration, I feel like integration is the best place to actually start a person's practice. And the nice thing about core transformation is that it aligns, well, maybe not aligns. It helps address the failure mode of what I would call the integration trap, where a person sort of works with say they're doing CBT or some other therapy modality. And if there's never any insight, then it's very possible for the person to just spend years sort of playing whack-a-mole with their own issues because they're not really increasing their digestive capacity all that much. They're
like
able to
jumping around
yeah,
piece to piece without like actually making any progress or being able to move forward or get a bigger understanding of what's of the workspace in this.
Right. So similarly to tranquil wisdom insight meditation, where they realized that taking metta as the object was a lot more effective, you have the integration practice, and then you also have people actually work with the core states as meditation objects. And that goes into the cycle of concentration and insight. That sort of gives you the full picture and enough of the whole stack to actually make profound progress relatively quickly. Is my guess. Like I don't have an existence proofs. I have other groups doing interesting things and seeing some progress. But yeah, having large numbers of people do this would be the test.
This is like your experimental hypotheses, I guess, that you're testing.
Yeah.
I love that. Like I love that you're doing, like, you're taking all this like very esoteric, very spiritual, you know, could be come across as wishy-washy or whatever, and like bringing it down into something like testable hypotheses and
Very
putting it out there and seeing what happens. Sorry?
It's very rationalist. Like,
Yeah.
I think that the rationalist mission is sometimes to like walk out into the unknown and take a flag and be like, I'm here now and I'm gonna work this damn shit out. Like,
well, the yogic tradition that I started in was very no nonsense, similar to the rationalists. They were like, okay, like let's get this shit done. Like, do you want to wake up? Then wake up. Should take 6 months to 3 years if you were like actually prioritizing this. So if we can't get people to stream entry in 3 years, then there's a question of what the hell's going on. Something's going wrong, essentially. And the position of that yogic school is something like, well, we have the psychotechnology that presumably works, like we have lots of evidence that it works, and yet we're not surrounded by awake people. So like, what's going on? And then they go into, okay, well, there's dead ends, there's significant blockers, there's snarls that people get into where they believe false things about their practice and what this process is supposed to look like, and then they stay stuck. So if you have the forward moving technology and you have the obstacle dealing with technology, then presumably those are the two pieces you need. You can make progress.
That's fun. Imagining it's like a train, and then you're having like the little thing in the front, move the stuff away, and you're having people repairing the tracks along the way and all the other train things. And so would you say that the core transformation, I guess, is part of the path to stream entry, or?
Yeah, so in the same way that, so core transformation is a generalized technology for working with obstacles. And then what was the other piece of that? And then core states themselves provide a lot of fuel for actually making forward progress. So yeah, I do think that with that as a sort of loading program, you can get people all of the pieces that they need to make progress. Now, I think that it's not deterministic in the sense that you can just give people a written set of instructions and they'll be able to follow it. There's a lot of degrees of, as you probably know from previous discussions, there's a lot of degrees of freedom in psychotechnologies. So one of the things that you quickly learn when you start trying to give pointing out instructions to people is the sheer scope of the ways people interpret what seem to be simple instructions, like at the level of like a single sentence. People are doing all kinds of things with their brain. And so it usually requires some period of tight feedback with a teacher or a person who's gone farther than you to sort of troubleshoot the various ways the brain is interpreting what's happening.
And then that would be like the first 90 minutes when you're talking about the first session is like it comes across as spaghetti code where you're just kind of like on a very almost bit by bit basis aligning yourselves, or
yeah, just being able to point out that so the mind tends to flow along in its habitual grooves, and those habitual grooves are different from person to person. But if you can sort of, if an external person can be like, stop, wait, hang on, let's go back, like let's rewind, you'll have a person say a sentence and you'll be like, oh wait, there were like 4 inferences there that aren't necessarily justified. Let's actually go through them step by step. So the reason that this technology is not widely known already, my hypothesis, is that it's extremely front-loaded. And what I mean by that is the first time you do it is the time that it's most complex and tricky to deal with. The first few sessions are just this mess of intentions going every which way and objections to every possible thing, and all these weird little like self-feeding snarls. And once you give people existence proofs for dealing with the sort of different types of snarls that you tend to encounter, then they can start doing it on their own. They'll still get stuck, and that for that reason I usually suggest people do it in pairs, because the person who's really in it, they typically don't have the extra RAM, even if they're sort of like, they know on some level, or some part of them understands how to scaffold the process. When you're really in it and devoting all of your resources to trying to process something, there's processes by default in your mind that will they have memory leaks. They'll just eat all available RAM. And then you'll just go into like confusion and like dropping the stack and like sleepiness, or like weird effects happen. And so you need that other person there to be like, whoa, wait, let's slow down. Let's go back to something happened. Let's rewind to slightly before whatever happened, like go very slowly and observe what the mind is experiencing aversion to, or whatever it is. Yeah, I think that answer the thing.
Yeah, I think you're saying like, yeah, sorry, you said a lot, and I kind of want to do the thing that you're describing while you're describing doing it without interrupting you, and sort of keeping that flow. So I am feeling like the scope of the problem that you're dealing with. Yeah, sorry, there's a lot of stuff I want to say all at once. So I think like I'm liking to keep like to try to like say the stuff and then simplify it as we go, so that the viewers can understand it as well. So like part of what you're doing, I think, is your like within the partnership is like creating the containers and being in the containers at the same time is a very difficult thing to do without practice. Even with practice, I think it is. And so you're having the people sort of come together to reinforce that container while being in the container themselves. And then the other thing, and then going back, is the front loading. So you're having this, like it takes this, like it takes someone who's been through it and has a lot of practice, is very good at it, to deal with someone for the first time till all this stuff gets organized in a way that they can then continue to organize.
And sharing representations with them that have more intervention points built in by default.
That's really nice. It's like you're building these anti-fragile systems for the people. Something I'm curious to point out is you're calling I think you called it the existential proofs or something like that.
Existence proof.
Existence proofs.
So yes, if you've never seen something, like if you've never seen a healthy relationship, you just won't have any training examples at all, right? So you won't even know that certain moves exist. And so just seeing it one time, this was actually part of the thesis behind some of the PBS children's shows of like Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. It's like, okay, there's a lot of children in like really bad homes. Can we just have one model that they can see of like some sort of healthy interaction between characters, and that this is has an outsized effect, just even a single example.
Yeah, it gives them that like vision to work towards. Yeah, I absolutely like crave those things, and I'm always looking for them in my life, like just examples of people doing the things that I want to do and like them doing it well. And even though all that stuff doesn't translate, it's still like it gives me there's a word we use, like, yeah, like it gives me like would you call it existence proof, which I really love. So what are some of these existence proofs?
I feel like
Can you
that's
share
something
with
you'd
us?
have to do if you want him to show it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to actually
Let me do the
make it
therapy
real
test.
to your system. But even the core states, right, are like existence proofs, right? So if you've been living in a condition of scarcity around connection with other people, and then getting deeply in touch with what is the sort of energetic signature of that connection that you're craving, that's really dramatic. That can be a really dramatic experience for the person, right? So this would be one hypothesis for why a single MDMA session can sometimes cause substantial permanent improvements for people with PTSD.
Right, because it's like a category class different experience reality shifter. Like, oh, that's possible. I mean, I guess I'm like, oh wait, I think I have an example, which is just sometimes like loving kindness towards a part that you're really stubborn or you don't like. Just like, oh, I hate this part of me. I'm very annoyed with it. Oh wait, what if I give it some appreciation or something like the whole thing can crack open and like wonderful things can happen just because I applied this like slight amount of appreciation to this part, which obviously I've forgotten to do for, years and years and years, or, it's been, as long as this part has been stuck with me, I refuse to appreciate it. But if I just, that little essence can like crack the thing open.
And in relationship too, right? So in your primary relationship, for instance, people tend to form relationships on the basis of similarities and differences. So both. But in the case of similarities, one of the similarities can be shared blind spots around ways of coping with experiences or the side effects of coping with experiences in a certain way. And so bringing just a little bit of a missing energy to that relationship can be really powerful. It can also be a little bit destabilizing, right? There might be a reason that both people were avoiding that type of energy. But if it can be scaffolded skillfully, if both people are sort of open and have the spare capacity, then it can be extremely healing.
I'm imagining that like getting all these existence proofs is itself almost like even just like to set it up so that you have it when people come in. Like you kind of already need this thriving community to be like, hey, these two people are a relationship, like look at that. This person's like really good at concentrating, look like that, look at that. Or alternatively, you're having to be able to do everything that you like on command that you would want the person to see.
I feel like an existence proof could be just a guy lifting something really heavy. Like, oh, I didn't know it was possible for humans to even do that. Like, okay, now I've seen it's possible. Maybe I want to move towards that skill myself. Like, it doesn't have to be, it can be in the concrete realm. I guess you can shift to like performance arena, like music or dance or anything over there, art. Like, oh, I didn't know it was possible to make something so beautiful. Like, okay.
Yeah, people who are doing serious contemplative practice, like there's lots of, it's very easy to find groups that are sort of doing light and fuzzy spiritual practices of like, yeah, everyone comes together, they talk a little bit about some nice words and it doesn't really land for anyone, but it sounds nice. And then they sit and relax for a little while. And then like everyone goes away feeling like slightly better. But there's no sort of hardcore insight happening. So anyone who comes to that scene who is seriously suffering and is like, I need insight now, like I need to like be making major changes to my moment to moment experience. It can be really lonely and alienating for them because it's very difficult for them to find. It's like, okay, where are the other hardcore people? And this was what motivated Daniel Ingram to start Dharma Overground way back in like the late 90s or whenever it was, because he just didn't see a community of people doing hardcore practices and like trying to make concrete progress. Now, obviously, just like everything else, there's a shadow side to the full insight. Like let's go. It's basically a monastic practice, doing just all insight all the time, because it will tend to sort of blow up your personality matrix in fairly short order, which is not the most functional thing to be happening when you're a householder, right? If you have a job and family and responsibilities, you don't want to be like, let's go straight down to the sub basement and just like load some C4 charges onto the load bearing elements like right away. Like there's none of this like slow,
I have an idea,
remodeling.
Romeo. Let's just dig up your trauma and then like explode it all over the world. Like just like reveal it to everyone all the time. That's what that sounds like a fun walk in the park, doesn't it? Like, ugh. I get it that's it's gonna be scary, and also maybe some people need that too.
Yep.
I kind of want to be, I mean, one of my reflections recently was the first in-person retreat I went on. They had this dynamic of acceptance and challenge, where there was a lot of like accept you as you are and let you kind of be the way you are, and then like gentle, like, are you sure you want to be that way? Like, are you sure that's all you can do? And like, I was reflecting recently that you know, the world will challenge you. There's no shortage of people like being calling you on your bullshit, or like little signs from the world being all like, you're not quite calibrated in the way. But it's very rare to find like unconditional acceptance in the world, like a community that will unconditionally accept you such that you can relax your layers of snarls and then like grow up. And that was like, that's something I'm thinking about now, of like, oh, how do we build more of that space that obviously doesn't turn into a toxic hippie shark festival, which of course the hippie cultures often have a shark swimming through them, like a person who is quite toxic, because hippies are just accepting, and like we all know he's the shark, but like no one can reject him because hippies don't reject anyone. So somehow we need to stop that from happening at the same time as like have a like unconditional acceptance, which is a great mystery that I'm still sitting on.
I call this Buddhism with an Air Force.
With an Air Force, like they can fight.
like if you're not willing to sustain the conditions that lead to awakening, then you're not going to have very much awakening in the long term.
As in by conditions to awakening, you mean the unconditional or the fight?
Like the condition, I mean the conditions in the world, in the material world, right? So Buddhism is less extant in India than it is in the United States, because it was completely wiped out, almost completely wiped out from the entire Indian subcontinent by the time the British arrived. And that was because competing religions came and conquered everyone and tore up the temples and burned all of the manuscripts and killed everyone involved. So that's highly effective. If you're not willing to defend your stuff, then you're not going to have your stuff for very long, unfortunately.
Can we talk more about this? Because this is very this is something that's very like a problem that I encounter that I don't have a good solution for. Because I think you're 100% right. Like I do see this all the time where I'm like, hey, let's have like this sort of more Zen place where everybody can be what they want and do what comes naturally and accept each other. And then but like also it's like very structured, like yes, you are Zen, and if you're not Zen, then like working here, so but which is like kind of like that opposite. So it winds up being this like weird contradiction where we want to be chilled and we need to enforce this chilledness in a chilled way, and that seems like kind of impossible or paradoxical.
Well, gardens require walls, right? And a garden made entirely of walls would not be a garden, right? So it's okay for the wall to have wall nature, and it's okay for the garden to have garden nature.
So to translate that, a lot of what you're doing is sort of keeping out, I guess, the sharks, as Elliot would call them, like keeping out the pests, versus more having like an immune system within it where the things can get in, but there's the ecosystem of the garden, it will take care of the predations or the destructive elements.
Another way of putting it is that if your immune system was not a fascist police state, you wouldn't be able to exist for the next month.
Because there's so much bacteria in the world, it will have eaten us by the end of the month.
Yes.
Right.
And
it's such a subtle balance already that we're barely alive as it is.
And many of us are not. Many of us do not withstand the slings and arrows of the world.
I mean, I was when I went on my Vipassana, we're going back 2.5 years or so, I was super excited. I'm about to go hang out with a bunch of meditators who are like wise people who are smart enough to go on a Vipassana. And I got there and they were like, it was a smaller cohort because it was kind of during COVID. There was 60 people. And it was like 60 ordinary people who were so fucked up they've decided they needed a Vipassana. And I was like, damn it, I came here to like spend time with the wise elders, and I like ran into the ordinaries who like desperately needed to also meditate. Yeah, I don't know about like on the one hand I want to be building the gardens and then only letting the cool people in, and on the other hand the people who really need it are the like everyone else.
Well, you do need respite in order to like you don't simultaneously do the R&D for new psychotechnologies while literally living in an insane asylum and being constantly screamed at by schizophrenics, right? You need to go somewhere else. That you do have to go back to the asylum at some point, because you need to actually gather real information and not just build castles in the sky of intellectual models that might help, which, you know, academia is very guilty of. But there is a back and forth there.
So you're like partitioning it. So you have the research center and then the testing center, and then I guess the real world applications after that. So I mean, I want to know what does your research center look like? How do you guys work the psychotechnologies? And that's the thing that's really interesting to me. Like, how do you
just
develop
getting people together?
stuff?
Yeah, I mean, these days you can rent an Airbnb anywhere in the world, right? And just sort of like host, you know, 6 to 10 people for several weeks to a month. And this is great for a research sprint.
So is this like someone will be like, hey, I want to develop this thing, and then invite the 10 people that they think are most likely to make that happen. Right. And then you guys just sort of go at it until something works or something breaks.
I gotta plan myself more research sprints. This sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like,
yeah,
I know enough people who want to do that. I want to do that, and like to the extent that I'm like a gravity well, and all my friends have started moving towards personal development and growth. Like, oh yeah, like people, I'm starting to see people pop up who are like growth junkies like me, but I don't know if I'm there yet to have like 10 people who would spend a month doing development work.
They might start with the weekend, right? People need to taste the chocolate before they're willing to invest more resources.
Sure, this is true. Definitely something to think about. I mean,
yeah, I mean that sounds so amazing. Do you to move it into the mundane, do you like, what kind of tools or setup do you find to be important or vital to like actually like concretize, actually like having something at the end of it? Like I assume like whiteboards or like computers.
Laptops and just those big drawing pads are sufficient, I think. Like I said, people getting together in a co-located place is a lot more idea fermentation conducive than trying to do things remotely. And then it helps if you've seen these kinds of things run well. That's helpful. And then having things like there's things that pop up, like having a theory of change, having a pedagogical model, having concrete scaffolding that you are potentially working to, right? So that it's not just you don't want your output to be the sort of thing that bureaucratic committees come up with. You know, we will work towards greater synergies in the future and more.
Yeah.
No, it's like, okay, there's concrete pieces that sort of slot into a theory of change, and then if we're attempting to improve one of the pieces of that, how are we going to measure that, right? In the sense of like how to measure anything. How would we quantify that, and what do we expect to see in that world where we're improving it? And yeah, so just sort of not wasting time with a lot of platitudes.
And is that stuff that you would come in with before? Like it's part of the premise of the retreat is this is the thing we're working on, these are the theories of change, or is that something that like you work out together as you go on? Like what's the front loading? I'm sort of asking, I guess, like what's the front loading for successful retreat?
Ideally, at least 2 people have done some homework on bringing in some concrete scaffolding. Because if you have at least two people, there can be a generative discussion arising out of the collision of those two models. And then if you want to workshop that stuff in the first few days of the retreat, that works well. It can turn into sort of a never-ending bike shedding. So you have to be sort of on the lookout for that sort of thing. But yeah, it's really about finding generative seeds, and that can be people or concepts or systems. Even, you know, calling it, so say you're going on a core transformation retreat, right? That's implying about how you're going to spend your time while you're there and what you're going to do and what sorts of things might come up. So it's sort of like, what are the ingredients lists that people are bringing? And you can assign homework, right? You can say, hey, for all the people that I'm inviting to this, you know, if you're serious about it, I would like to see XYZ, where that's
Like read a book.
yeah, read something, or be familiar with this material, have written up like a summary of your understanding of it, so that there's the easy way to waste time is for people to spend all of their time just talking out stuff that they could have figured out on their own in, like, you know, 20 minutes if they had actually sat down and put in the thought ahead of time. Because people, there's a lot of people think by speaking, and especially think by speaking in a conversation with another person. And that's fine, but there's a thing about not making things a one-on-one space, and that also has to do with like who you invite, right? So if you invite a bunch of people who are completely unfamiliar with the research agenda, then yes, you're going to be spending all of your time just getting them up to speed, which is not necessarily what you actually want, right? It's great if you're like trying to learn how to get people up to speed faster. If that's like the point of what you're doing, that's fine. But if you're trying to get, you know, deep progress on something, deep work, then you want to make sure that everyone is on board with that and understands some of the scaffolding around that.
I'm curious about first of all, how many people do you think you need in a container like this? Like, you said about 10 or so.
10 is actually a max, I would say, because once the conversation starts getting too unwieldy, you sort of can't all stay on the same page. I would say 4 to 8 is closer to ideal. With 8, you can split out into 2 groups of 4. 2 or 3 is fine if you already have good generative chemistry with those people. So yeah.
So like the smaller the number is, the less generative, but the bigger the number is, the more unwieldy. So
yes. So there's a balance point. 4, 5, 6 people.
So if you're coming in with good generation, then you can have a small team just taking that. Yeah, that's so interesting. I love the way you're sort of I forgot what the word is, where you're like specifying all the parameters of even not even like the thing that you're doing, but the thing that you're doing to do the thing that you're doing, where you're like yeah, like you're being very intentional and thinking out the generative process to generate the thing that you want. Very psychotechnologically minded.
Well, you sort of have to, right? Because if something is rare, that implies that the conditions for its formation are fragile. And so you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get those conditions in place to make sure that the thing happens.
This is there's a economic theory of that you won't find $50 sitting on the ground, because if you do, someone would have already picked it up, right? Especially in a busy place. And in that sense, I hold the philosophy that chances are your business idea needs to be a little bit tricky or harder to get to happen. Otherwise, someone else would already be doing it. If it was too easy to make that $50, someone else would already be doing it. Not always, but kind of like can be difficult. Needs to have some sort of difficulty barrier to slow other people down. And if there's no difficulty barrier, you're probably missing something.
Although I did find like $140 on the street once, so it kind of broke my.
It happens. It just doesn't happen every day, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I found $50 on the ground like once in my life, you know. Like, okay, anecdotally, it does happen occasionally. I'm interested in you described some people like to understand by speaking, right? This is you said just a little earlier, and I've seen this too, and I'm trying to understand that phenomena because well, if I could save people having to speak a thing, maybe they could progress much faster if they didn't have to talk their way through it. Do you have thoughts about what's going on there? Why do they need to speak, or like how to work with someone who's got that to like get them out of having to speak it?
Yeah, it's so if core transformation is the most upstream obstacle thing because it like teaches you the skill of dealing with obstacles, the next set down from that, as soon as you learn that skill, is to apply it to other major blockers of like, you know, major speed bump processes that prevent you from learning arbitrary skills. And so if you have some sort of hard requirement for some sort of, it's a bottleneck analysis basically, right? Like if there's a hard requirement for something that's scarce, then you want to invest quite a bit into figuring out, is there a way to just completely unblock that requirement?
So if someone
needs
like a safe container, or someone needs lots of time to unwind, like
right.
How do we get that thing quicker?
Yeah, so I think essentially you do core transformation sessions on those specifically, where you try to figure out like, okay, what's my objection to, they have this in NLP, actually. It was one of the more interesting things NLP did, which they were like, people will have a mental model that change is slow and difficult. And it's like, okay, let's go after that one first. And if you can make progress on that one, well, then suddenly everything else is easier. So yeah, same thing. There's some sort of underlying emotional need or belief about the world that if it can be tweaked just slightly, maybe that energy can be freed, and then the person can make dramatically faster progress.
I'm imagining like just like the way, first off, I love the way you're like talking about this stuff and describing it. It feels like you're finding like all these pieces are kind of existing, and you're like moving the matrix or whatever in a way, like it feels like you're bending reality almost at itself, or at least like I guess the reality that we're sharing. Forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, vision. Do you have like a large vision for this? Like, is this like, are you creating like a hyper object, or is this like a more of a diffuse like community, or what's your vision of the future?
Well, I briefly mentioned one, which is sort of attaining what I call like attaining closure over like valuable things, which is a truly self-sustaining process is one that is capable of generating its own inputs, right? It doesn't leave it to someone else or to something else or some random processes in the world. It attempts to internalize its own formation, its own necessary ingredients, right? So vertically integrated Buddhism that doesn't rely on there being, you know, a king in power who happens to be sympathetic to Buddhism and is willing to just like give them a park to stay in that has very nice conditions, and oh yes, they have, you know, food and such from the community.
Like an independent arising almost within the...
Yeah, something that's a bit more self-sustaining and recognizes its own requirements, and is more comfortable with householders and not just a, you know, monastic order, more comfortable with being in the world, attempting to affect positive change in the world. And yeah, but that's ultra high level vision. I'm very flexibly open to how it actually plays out. I don't have strong opinions. Michael Singer is really good about this. He talks about how he wound up where he did simply because he just kept saying yes to things that seemed interesting. He didn't sort of form a sieve of his personality where like, oh no, I say no to these sorts of things, I say yes to these sorts of things. And if he had, you know, done that, then he would have passed up on what turned out to be major opportunities that he didn't recognize at the time, because they didn't pass his existing personality filter of what he likes and doesn't like.
It's very unfixated of you.
I'm curious about like right now, are you in touch with any particular core state? Like, is it live for you in this moment? He's checking.
It wasn't when you were saying that. I was sort of kind of in my head. As soon as you said that, I became more in the body. There was a shooting of energy up from the stomach. I've been working lately with a lot of hara stuff.
Nice.
There's like action in the world. I mean, talking about it, right? Action in the world. There's one way of framing the ways in which things get screwed up at a very high level. There's a bunch of subtle ways, but one of the high level ones is if we take the major centers as being like head, heart, hara, there's communication channels between all of those. So that would be like what, three different communication channels.
It's like chakras.
Yeah, and so you can imagine that any one of those channels could have substantial blockages, or if not full blockages, then like partial blockages where it lets in certain things but not other things. And so yeah, I think my major blockage is like, well, initially it was all of them, which I think is normal. And then I had a big head heart purification, where that channel is like much cleaner. But I think like head hara, heart hara, both of those potentially something screwy still. So I've been working with that, and it's good. Obviously, it's trapped energy, right? So the more you purify it, the more energy you have available, less drained you feel.
I'm curious, how do you work on that?
Well, it's like Shinzen would say, right? Concentration, clarity, and equanimity, right? So concentration isn't just a formal practice, but sort of like the stance that leads you to spending concentrated time on something also, right? Like creating the conditions under which you would do concentrated work, which I guess is just another microcosm of what we were just talking about, like creating the conditions to like generate something. So concentrated time, sensory clarity is a matter of like practice, right? You like body scans and noting are examples of like you can tune the mind to noticing the fine gradations in the physical sensations and the mental reactions to those physical sensations. And then the more you do that, the more high resolution the stuff gets. And then equanimity with those reactions, which again, core transformation and other similar or in the same ballpark or things you might do as part of core transformation related to resonance or equanimity practices. And then it just sort of improves itself, right? Because as you work with whatever was blocking it, it's like it's like in the spoons frame, right? Where people are lacking spoons. Well, if you do something that gets you more spoons, part of what you want to do with those spoons is like reinvest them in whatever process like got more spoons. So you want to figure out like, okay, where are the net positive spoon generators, and then make sure that those are topped up, right? So this is where the whole like healthy living, right? It's like that no one really wants to deal with, right? It's like, well, okay, sleep and exercise and healthy foods are going to be net positive spoon generators, even though they do take upfront and then some ongoing maintenance costs. They're going to generate more spoons than they cost in the long run. So I want to make sure that those stay topped up so that I have the maximum spoons for everything else. And then, yeah, once you have spare capacity, just quality time with whatever arisings you have. It does feel silly at first. In the first couple of years, it feels you haven't yet observed the loop enough times that you have faith that it's going somewhere really good. It's like the very first time someone goes through a real heavy duty purification cycle, it can be a major crisis, right? Because suddenly, disgust, for instance, comes up as the body's like, well, we're doing the disgust thing now, like time to purify disgust. And then now you're stuck in like potentially hours of like intense physical manifestations of disgust and mental imagery of disgust and disgusting words and sounds, and it feels like vomiting, right? It's like more rapid dark nights are like this, right? You just like, it's just this constant stream of like disgust. And it can be overwhelming, right? But then once you've been through it a few times, you start to have faith. You're like, oh no, this is really good, right? The first time you go through, you have no, especially if you have no foreknowledge of any of this kind of stuff, you have no idea that something good is happening. You're just like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, basically.
And also I'm about to
Why,
die, and
whatever I did
crazy
to cause
and I'm
this
never
is
coming
bad.
back.
And I'm gonna, sorry, go ahead.
Also, I'm about to go crazy and I'm never coming back.
Yes, right, yeah.
Oh no, I can see, I'm seeing disgust imagery everywhere. This is definitely a symptom of madness and like
Yes.
permanent decay, and like, and you know, the like, yes, I'm having visual imagery of disgust, but it's actually infiltrating my thought stack, right? And my thought stack is like, oh no, I am decaying, like I am
Yes.
like destroying, like this is horrible. And then, you know, as you said, having faith in getting to the other side, it's like, oh, actually that was good. I let go of a bunch of stuff and now I feel freer.
So yeah, I feel like really takes a few times for the major ones, and even then it can be hard, especially with fear tends to be the worst one, I think. The most snarly and sticky, at least for me. Maybe it's different from other people.
I'm trying to think.
But yeah,
the sticky
sorry.
part. I don't think the fear is the most sticky for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's personal. Like it depends on your path as to which one's going to be more sticky. I would say, I mean, we're talking stages of insight. I have trickiness around reobservation, mainly because I feel a bit lost and I don't know where I am. And then I'm like, well, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And then like, I just wait and then I get to the other side. But like that one's a bit confusing. Whereas I don't think I have problems with fear. I have to watch. I'll watch the next thing that comes up in a cycle. Because obviously I'm going to have a most sticky spot.
I think that stuff also changes as well, right? Because like whichever the most sticky, then you're working on, and now it's not
Right.
the most sticky anymore.
It's like, which is the weakest muscle in your body? Well,
yeah. As soon as you focus on it for a while, it's no longer the weakest.
it gets stronger, and then there's another weakest link.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing some discuss stuff as well. So not that into it. But it's the thing. Like you got to do the thing, or you're not gonna have the thing done.
Okay, so core states. There are
yeah. I mean, I'd love if to like do that stuff with you. If you're able to hold that container for your hara and
pointing out of core states or something?
Being in it and you know, like bringing us into that process.
Oh, right now? I don't think we have time. Yeah.
I feel like some core transformation NLP work on time.
I'm just going off of my past experience, right? Usually at least 90 minutes. I did have one case of a person who there were zero objections. It was amazing. I was like, am I doing it wrong? Like, is it actually working? But I guess they had already done a lot of practice and had already dealt with a lot of stuff. And so the first time I walked them through, just no objections to feeling positive states at all, and just straight into like feeling nice. It was pretty interesting.
I have to agree. I've had that like once. I was working someone through things, and they were a meditator, and so they'd done some work, and I was like, can you go up? And they were like, yep. And I was like, keep going. And I was like, they like had so much access to things that they had sort of like, they were working on the grind, and I was like, nope, don't grind. But yeah, it really depends on the practitioner as to where they're at.
I can at least briefly mention the two moves. So going down and up to make it a little bit more concrete. So going down, there's lots of ways to go down and up, but the particular way that Connierae discovered after workshopping it for many years, apparently, is for cutting down. It's let's say that there's some goal that a part has, and you ask the part, okay, what would you get through having that fully and completely, as much as you want, anytime you want, in exactly the way that you want? What would you get through having that that's even more important? And so this is sort of cutting down to its motivational, like what is its deep motivational structure? And then, you know, either it'll give you something back, or it will object in some way, or some other part will object, right? And then you work with it. Going up, it's you're asking questions like, okay, what is this part doing? Like, what's it up to? What's its job? And then you're getting some sort of activation in the body somewhere. And then instead of diving into that as you normally would, you ask instead, where am I observing that from? Right? So if you're observing sensations in the stomach, then there's some impression of an observer somewhere. And that's actual physical sensations. And you practice noticing the physical sensations until you get better at it, because it takes a little bit of time. But then you notice where you're looking at it from, and then you recurse on that, and you go out bigger, and you're like, okay, so if I'm aware of the physical sensations of looking at the things in my stomach, then I must be observing those physical sensations from somewhere, right? And so you observe where that's coming from. And that also tends to cut subtler and subtler into more expanded awareness. And
That's intense.
I like that move, actually. I'm like, oh, I should do more of those moves. Like I
There's
was
like a
familiar with the down
recursiveness
move,
to it.
but I guess forgetful of the up move. Daniel's
Yeah,
trying.
there's an interesting recursiveness to it where the parts are seeing themselves. But then I guess you're just moving up to what's seeing the recursiveness, or what's seeing the system.
well, yeah, how is the observer constructed, right? The sense of observer as separate from the contents that it's observing.
Hmm.
We do actually, we have a question came through our stream chat.
Oh,
I'm gonna just grab one through, which is I don't know if you know Charlie Smith, maybe not. Anyway, my big block right now is worrying that if I won't do anything if I had access to core states, piece in particular. What do you say to that?
Yeah, this is the most common objection. So that's
Right,
great.
if I have the good thing, then bad thing will happen, kind of. Or,
Yeah. So the other reason it's called core transformation is that it's about transforming core schemas. And I don't know if it's like chief among them overall, but like I think the primary one that tends to come up first or early on in people's processes is exactly this one. The whole schema of engagement with reality that you've learned ever since you were a child, I think starting when you started getting your behavior shaped by your parents. So at some point, so love was unconditional at some point. You just had your needs met sort of by fiat, no matter what you do. You could shit your pants and your needs are still met. And then at some point, the parents shift into shaping your behavior. So they reward certain behaviors and don't reward other behaviors. And so love goes from being unconditional to being at least partially conditional. And I think that this is extremely traumatic. And I think that people's personalities is partially predicated on how they learn to cope with that. And this is all pre-verbal, right? So it's all very deep structure that isn't necessarily available to the verbal mind. And there's a few different ways that people sort of learn to deal with that. And these form some of the core schemas. But one of the schemas is, in fact, good things are dangerous or threatening or in some way problematic because they can be withheld. And so I need to come up with some way of dealing with the fact that pleasure is actually threatening to the existential personality matrix, whatever you want to call it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bundle up the positive feelings, and I'm going to drip feed them to myself with this conditional schedule. I'm going to internalize the external conditions. And by internalizing those external conditions, I'm going to gain some measure of control over them, and then it's less scary. So instead of the parent being entirely the one who controls everything, I'm going to control myself when I drip feed myself the positive states, and then I'm going to shape my own behavior, and then I'm going to avoid getting in trouble because I'm going to do the things that are right ahead of time without having to be told, or whatever it is. It's more complicated than this. There's lots of degrees of freedom here. I'm kind of sort of glossing it, but something like that is a very core schema to our way of being, that I'm going to hold the carrot out in front of myself with a fishing pole and then chase after it. And there's no logical argument that I can give because it's actually a matter of experience. But what Connierae says is something like, try this out in areas that do not feel very load bearing, that problems that feel very trivial. You get down to the core state, and after lots of cycles of objections, and you once you reach the core state, you go back up. So you ask yourself, okay, if I already say it's safety, if I already feel safe, if I already have access to this feeling of safety, what's it like to pursue the goal above that that was ultimately aimed at safety? What is it like to pursue that goal in the world already feeling safe? And the answer you get back generally is that, oh, it's actually easier, right? Because it's sort of like, you know what you're looking for. If someone tells you that they lost their key, or, well, even that's too much information, that they lost something, and can you help me look for it? You'd be like, I need a little more information here, right? And they're like, well, it's a key. It's like, okay, well, actually, it's like there's 6 keys in the room, so can you give me? It's like, oh, it's a green key, right? It's like you need to like sort of know what you're looking for in order to form that shape with your attention. If you're looking at a pile of Legos and then you know that you're looking for a particular form and a particular color and a particular size, all of those things turn your attention into this sieve where you're able to scan over a large amount of information and there it is, right? So when you have, it was a reasonable strategy. It seemed to work for some time to sort of cut yourself off from all these good feelings. But it has a bunch of side effects and it doesn't work well for a bunch of types of motivation, and especially more abstract motivation that we run into as adults, where we need to have these sort of time shifted motivations and abstracted objects. So getting back in touch with those good feelings gives you the actual energetic signature of what you're looking for. And then when you go and pursue those goals, you're able to actually just sort of be in touch with the ultimate underlying thing. You're like, oh, okay, well, this is, what am I looking for? Like physical safety. Well, okay, so if I meditate on physical safety, am I going to like go walk into traffic? No. You're going to say, okay, I want to be safe in myself. So what does it feel like to be safe? And then as I go and navigate the world, I'm able to notice the things in the world that are generating feelings of safety or not. And then I can investigate and be like, why is that generating a feeling about safety? And I can sort of check. And so I'm going back through the spaghetti code that I built when I was, pre-verbal, all the way up to started doing contemplative practice, just laying down unreflective conditioned patterns. And I'm now going back through and manually checking through that stuff. And yeah, it's tricky because it sounds untenable from the perspective of not yet being skilled up in these things. So for instance, in the Finders course, they have an exercise where they're like, list everyone that you can remember having any kind of like emotional interaction with. And you're just like, what? Surely that's not possible. And they're like, no, go do it. Like, we've done this before. And yeah, it might take you several days of like hour-long sessions multiple times throughout those several days. But it turns out it's only like, 300 to 500 specific incidents that you really remember. Maybe there's like a bunch of low-level activation ones that you're like, whatever, that it's not really anything. But in terms of like things that you can remember having an emotional reaction to, it's not that many, right? It's a finite number. And you can, in fact, go through and process all of them.
Holy shit. You just took this infinite and made it finite.
Yeah.
It's not going to be infinite because you have a finite lifetime, right?
It was infinite before he said what he said.
Right.
So
Now
if you
it's
believe that in theory, the processing could be like way more than the actual original incident, then like, yeah, it could be like more than is like available. But it turns out that that's just not true, right? The natural half-life of emotions is like, 30 seconds or less, because that's just physiologically how you're set up as a mammal. So yeah, you do not sit in your wire-headed throne just feeling safe forever while a bus heads towards you. You get in touch with safety. You're like, oh, that's what safety actually is like in the body. That's what embodied safety feels like. And then when you go out and navigate in the world, you have, it's like being able to actually just look at the compass, right? It's like you look at the world and then you look at your map and you're like, oh, yep, there's north, right? So if you have processes where you were doing a lot of extra steps because you were trying to like rationally figure out like what is safety in like a philosophical sense or like whatever it is, right? And then it turns out, oh no, I was doing all of that because I was cut off from the actual feeling, or cut off from the actual felt sense, which is a different type of processing in the body besides just the logical reasoning. And the idea that you're going to replace all your logical reasoning with, so I'm going to become like a woo-woo person. It's like, no. These are both complementary tools, right? They found that people with certain sorts of brain damage who lose all access to felt senses, they can logically reason themselves through decisions, but it takes them huge amounts of time. It'll take them like 40 minutes to reason through something like do I need to go to the bathroom, or like, should we go to X, or should I talk to this person? They're completely crippled in practical terms because they're not able to use this much more rapid parallel processing. But yeah, serial processing is great for error checking the parallel processing. That's probably why we have it.
I'm like, oh, there's a lot here. I'm now done.
Yeah, I'm like trying to reason through it and then also not trying to reason through it.
Like, I mean, I like the question as well, the like, but if I have peace, I'll do nothing question, right? Because I'm like, yeah, but have you tried peace?
Yeah, I think there's a complexity of value thing. So like, if the feeling of peace is all you wanted, then maybe you do nothing. But like, that seems to never really happen, or like,
yeah,
I guess it occasionally happens, but I've never actually seen it. So Daniel Ingram has also encountered this objection a lot. And in his several decades, he said he started looking specifically for cases of it. And he says he hasn't actually discovered any serious cases in his.
Imagine
personal...
maybe like days long or weeks long, nothing doing. But then at some point, I'm just gonna flip into a new path, sort of a new something to do.
Yeah, like your values include things like compassion for yourself and others, and like taking joy in things. And so like, you're going to like be like, well, like I fixed some of the underlying problems. Now I can actually go do the things that I wanted to do with like much less friction, which might involve helping yourself or others, or doing fun and interesting things.
Yeah. I can't have good thing because of resistance. Feels like a very strange, from the perspective of like a guy over here who just has access to, like, I can like reach out and touch the good thing, right? This is the, like, if I have access to core states, right? I can just like, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's good. Like, have someone say to me like, oh, but if I have the good thing, then bad thing will happen. I'm like, just reach out and touch the button. Like, it's right here. Try it. And then like, you'll decide after whether or not you'll have the good thing and the bad thing. It's not like heroin. It's like, oh,
well,
yeah,
the metaphor that I really like is a person who is starving being like taken to an all-you-can-eat buffet. And it's like, yes, their strategies for dealing with like the regime in which they were starving to death are not going to serve them well in the all-you-can-eat buffet. In fact, if you sort of just like let them have unfettered access, they might like kill themselves, like especially if they were recently starving. Your system seems to mostly have safe interlocks around this, where like it will slowly ease you into the things that it needs to slowly ease you into. Your system will titrate out things that are threatening, and that's part of the whole process, right? If you throw up 20 layers of objections, well, working through all of those is in fact the process of slowly dipping your toe in and feeling into like, okay, what are all the problems? And like, let me actually address these fully for myself, not like pretend addressing them like, oh, I went through the process and now those parts can shut the fuck up and I can like finally do jhana. Like, no. If your part has a serious objection to jhana, you're going to have to investigate that and actually deal with it to your satisfaction. Everything's coming along for the ride. Like, your fully integrated self is the self that wakes up, not a lobotomized version of you.
I'm glad you brought up jhana, because I wanted to ask you this as well. Like, how do you align core transformational states with jhanas? You know, like classic 8 jhana model. Like, because I have this problem where I have a lot of these models all in my head, and I've built independently massive models, and I'm like, at this point going like, wait a second, there's some huge chunks of overlap between these models, and I just don't know where they are, and I need to like unify them and simplify them because I'm just juggling far too many models that I need. How do you align them for you? Or
yeah, I mean, people do it in different ways. For me, the Brahmavihara Sutta, people come. So Brahmavihara practice was a practice that existed before the Buddha's time. It was a yogic practice, and so other spiritual teachers were like teaching their disciples Brahmaviharas. And so at some point, some other disciples come to the Buddha and they're like, well, our guy teaches Brahmaviharas. Like, what do you think of Brahmaviharas? Are they good? Are they bad? Like, what does Buddhism have to say about Brahmavihara practice? And the Buddha says, at least in one translation, it gets tricky. He says in one translation, as far as I can tell, Brahmavihara practice is great. It can get you all the way to third path, but it won't get you all the way. However, if you take Brahmaviharas to third path and then see the 3 characteristics in the 5 aggregates, that will take you all the way. And this is really interesting to me because this is one of the very few places in the suttas that we get such a concrete and direct discussion of like techniques resulting in attainments. Because like in the rest of them, it's like all very like cagey and vague for unknown reasons. But here, this is like pretty direct. It's like, oh yeah, you can totally just do Brahmavihara practice. Oh, the connection of core states. Right. I didn't share that one of the key linkages, which is that as far as I can tell, core states and Brahmaviharas are kind of the same thing. There might be some slight differences. The core states, Connierae thinks there's 5 of them. There's only 4 Brahmaviharas. They're really all just different ways of slicing up different facets of like these states that you can attain. So like, I'm not too worried about like ontologizing them slightly differently.
Let's just list this. So the 4 Brahmaviharas: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, right? And the 5 core states, approximately.
I'm not even sure if I'll remember it correctly. I think like peacefulness, wholeness, beingness, oneness, lovingness, something like that.
Some of those are pretty close. Like,
yeah, exactly. I think the one that is the least a Brahmavihara is the one that's like oneness.
Yeah.
And that's like talking about like unity consciousness. And it makes sense, like it both makes sense to call it a core state, and it also makes sense to ontologize it separately. I think unity consciousness would be ontologized separately within the Buddhist sort of conception. Because that's like a third path thing, at least as far as I can tell. But yeah, unity consciousness, it makes like, unity consciousness definitely like a important and useful thing. So like, why not call it out?
Okay. Separate to jhanas. These are Brahmaviharas.
So jhanas are constructed states, right? So let's say that you are meditating on metta as your object, or you attain lovingness as your core state in core transformation, and it's like, okay, great, I'm going to meditate on this for a while. And then you're sort of you're sinking into that feeling of lovingness. With jhana practice, you would simply, at some point, you would notice how much you're appreciating and enjoying, and it is pleasurable to experience that core state. And at some point, you would shift your meditation object to the pleasurableness and liking it directly. And then sort of dive down through the traditional jhanas.
Right. So this is, I mean, that's proposing the jhanas are like an alternate dimension to core states.
Well, what the Buddha says about jhanas is that it is impossible to map the depths of jhana. And the reason he says this is that actually there's all sorts of different ways to enter jhana, and the different flavors that you resultantly get from using different entrance objects are apparently all over the place. So it's just sort of like this large space of like mind configurations that people can go into, and apparently it's so vast that even the Buddha in his omnipotence was like, it just goes forever. Like there's just all kinds of crazy stuff in there. So yeah, you can take anything as the object, and find a tradition that's like, yes, we take X as the object and we think it's the best object, and you should like study this object for 10 years and like try to get into hard absorption jhanas with this object. It's just like, it's all different stuff. So it's sort of taking a particular dimension of a meditation object and then cutting into it. And then there's the whole thing about Vipassana jhanas and like getting insight from it and stuff. And that's another rabbit hole we can I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So jhana is not on the same dimension as core states. Core states are closer to the Brahmaviharas. Which
although like I said, you can use them as entrance objects. It's totally fine. And I think better for most people.
Right.
It's almost like the jhanas, like if you're focusing on the core states, like the jhanas would be like if you can do the jhanas, that means that you've cleared everything, and like that you can just be in that state.
I think
jhanas are not necessarily fully purified. This might be getting in. Sorry.
Jhanas can be like a slice. Like I go into one of the core states and I like slice in quite deep through my entire psyche until I like snap out of reality. But I can like that very slice I can have clean, but I can have the slice slightly next to it not clean. Is that
yes?
Good?
Yes.
Yeah.
If it was the case that you needed to be fully purified before you could do jhanas, then like only arahants could do jhana. but like you can temporarily suppress the hindrances and enter jhanas, and then you come back out, and then the hindrances are still here. I guess I'm not fully purified, but they are helpful, right? They're very wholesome states.
Yeah, I mean, are you familiar with, I think it was Kenneth Folk's proposal of the Pure Land jhanas? There's a bunch of extra jhanas that somewhere around 8th jhana, if you're past 3rd path, you can access new jhanas or something. It was wacky. Kind of interesting, worth reading. I don't know if are you familiar with these?
Yeah, and Daniel talks about this too, right? This is sort of what I was just alluding to with what the Buddha says about them. Like you start noticing all of there's jhana factors that you use to enter jhana, right? And then you notice that there's actually like subtle ways that those factors can be different. And then once you attain like enough clarity on those, you can start to tweak them a little bit, and you get slightly different flavors of jhana. And you're just like, oh, that's interesting. That's like a really interesting flavor. I don't know if I can analogize it to anything, combining drugs or something. But yeah, he says the Buddha also says not to get too distracted with these, because like ultimately the version of them that you need to get deep insight into unraveling the various knots is pretty simple. Like you only need to get up to 4th, and it's not too complicated. And I think he says technically only 1st is needed, 4th is ideal.
Interesting. I mean, in my experience, like I take people through the jhanas sometimes. I do kind of like a pointing out version of the jhanas. And invariably, as I'm sitting with someone going through the jhanas, we find some of their stuff, some of their material in one of the jhanas that they either, usually it's like inability to access a jhana, one of them, or like resistance to staying in it, or like they're in it and then they move away very quickly, or invariably, like one of the most powerful things I find is that there's this relationship with them that like I skip over one, or I avoid one, or like that one seems boring or something like that. I mean, I've even met people who have one of the jhanas like really pristine and the rest are like rubbish. I'm like, well, I don't know how you ended up like that. This represents stuff. Like for me, I mean, you described fear as the hookiest state of the stages of insight. For me, my remaining psychological material is at 6th jhana. Like there's just stuff there in the relational other consciousness thing that I need to work through. Like that's just, I could sit in jhana for a while, but that didn't seem to work. And like I've got work to do in the relational space. Other people I've met have difficulty at 2nd or 3rd jhana. People who can't relax, or people who can't enjoy fully. Yeah, like.
And that's where the juice is, right? Because it's whatever that material is, it's threatening to the current personality matrix.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Oh, that's a really interesting question. So with that resource, right? I have access to various jhanas. I can sort of like lean in or lean out of various jhanas. I do the same thing with emotions. I can lean in or lean out of certain emotions, and I can feel relationally the bounds of the other person's ability to like visit a jhana. It's kind of like how I can diagnose and work with people. Do you have that? Like my question is, do you have that with core states, that you can visit your own core states and see which ones like don't land with the other person, or which ones feel more resistant today because you're with another person?
Not as such, because with core states, it's sort of like whatever core state the person happened to land on by that time. So like by that time, we've dealt with the objections. So for me, it's more of diving into an objection and really trying to inhabit the objection, and like empathizing with that objection's worldview of like, what would it be like for such and such to be really threatening? Right? What's that world like? And then I sort of ask some calibrating questions. I'm like, is it threatening like this? Is it like this? Like, what's the objection like? What is the juice of like why this is like bad, or pretend like what's the bad thing that happens if this objection were to be set aside, or something like that. Various little poking questions like that. And then really trying to sort of like feel into that energetic signature of like, oh yeah, that is really scary, or that is really bad or wrong, or whatever the feeling is. And then, yeah, I don't know exactly what the move is there. It's something
Just
like
sort of like empathize with it, and then it's
two people resonating with it just seems to create more space. Like the parts feel seen is the stereotype. But yeah, I think the if the part is like, oh, my objections are being taken seriously, that opens it up to dialogue. It's like, yeah, no, like two people here are going to devote their energy to figuring out what's wrong with this. We're assuming that like there's something true and good about the objection, and we're gonna like try to devote some resources to figuring it out.
Interesting.
Like the wireheading objection, there's something true and good about it.
Right.
Obviously, like wireheading's
I
bad.
don't want to lose my drive to do things just because everything's peaceful. That's like,
Yes.
yeah, totally. I get it. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this reminds me of we talked to Malcolm Ocean. He's developing a psychotech he's calling non-native trust dance, which is basically about different non-naive trust dance. That's right. Which is about parts of you or between you and another person not trusting each other. And so we're talking about something resisting a core state, saying like, I don't trust you that we should go there, right? It's going to be unsafe. We're going to lose all our goal drive. Like, yeah. I'm seeing the same psychotech. Like, we got to navigate that non-trust space. I mean, I also see like IFS and like navigating part conversations.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's this like base level that's all the same, and then as you go up the stack, it gets like super complex, and then it kind of comes back to simple again, which is just mostly like just observing. And then
people hang out in different parts of the perceptual stack habitually. So different people pay attention to different things, and then they habituate over time, over the years, to paying attention to those particular things. And then what happens is the level they pay attention on is simplified because they've put a lot of work into simplifying such that it's workable, right? It has like a few simple levers that they can pull. But then what you find is another reason that we're not surrounded by awake people all the time, because if this stuff is all simple or something or whatever, sandwiching the simple layer, both the layers on either side of the simple layer are highly complex, because that's where all the complexity has been pushed out of the habitual mode of perception. So there's a bunch of Rube Goldberg machines that all they do is try to make sure that the habitual layer stays simple.
I guess you're trying to reverse that in a way.
Well, you're just trying to investigate the spaghetti code and figure out like, okay, can we actually refactor this to not be Rube Goldberg? Like if Rube Goldberg, if it's trying to pour a glass of milk, why am I doing 20 steps with like chainsaws flying through the air in order to pour the glass of milk, right? Can I just pour the glass of milk? Psychedelics can often like cut straight through to this, which is why the experience is a bit weird. At least some people have this experience of suddenly inhabiting an extremely causal reality where everything is just stuff moving around. And it's like, why was it all so confusing? Why is there an extra 20 layers normally? And it feels very bare, like the experience is everything is just itself. Every place is just a place. Every action is just itself. And I don't even know how to describe it, right? I mean, I have to use weird language to even point at it.
Yeah, I feel like it's not necessary to describe it because it's just the thing in of itself. And so when you're trying to explain it, like you're trying to explain it using the Rube Goldberg language, and it's like no, we just don't do that. It's an alternate dimension, a different reality.
I'm interested in this description you've given of the like the clear space with the like the mess on either side, because I think I'm experiencing something quite similar at the moment where my general state most of my waking life is a vast clear open space, and I'm very suspicious because there's things that I've definitely pushed away which don't want to interface with my vast clear open space, because this is just such a different space from those things that they're like, nope, we don't belong there, or like we refuse to be viewed by a vast clear open space. You've got to drop that and come join us in the mess. And I'm like, okay, this is a new type of meditation. I need to like drop all the vast open spacious clear meditative bliss that I have, like let all that go and like jump into hell and like make friends with that. I don't know if you have any advice on how how to bring the crap back in without it obviously calling it crap isn't the kindest of things to do, but how to bring the crap back in an enjoyable way, maybe.
Well, yeah, you do have to go hunting for it, right? So if the early days are about cleaning up and sort of creating this nice space, well, going back to the R&D metaphor, it's like, okay, you created the nice space and you skilled up a lot in the nice space. Now you do have the capacity to go to, a hoarder's house, for instance.
Right. And
just be equanimous with the like, oh, whoa, that's a lot of stuff. And it's difficult when it's your own stuff, right? It's like, oh, I didn't realize I had all this crap still hanging around. If the jhanas and other, the highfalutin spiritual practices are sort of inviting our exiled parts into this clear space that we've made for ourselves and saying, look how much all these positive emotions you can enjoy. It's like inviting your depressed friend to a party, right? And then what we're describing now is, well, eventually, no, you go to your depressed friend's house and you see that they're sort of living in squalor and they're miserable and it's a really bad situation. And you're just like, okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing today.
But you don't want to like go to your depressed friend's house all excited and happy. You want to like gently enter and like be like, oh, I see what's going on. Okay.
Yeah. Don't God realm the hell beings. Yes.
Right. That's pretty cruel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you catch that, Daniel? It's the contrast.
Kind of. I feel like I make this mistake a lot, so I'd like to to double tap this.
Well, what we're doing here is kind of like a lot of human realm, right? It's like very much the understanding frame. But for a person who doesn't feel that that's accessible, it just feels like a bunch of instructions to do things that they don't know how to do, and like other aversive things.
I imagine you don't come in with instructions. Like that's not the first thing you do. It's almost the first thing you do is show up and exist, and your own stuff is there. Like whatever you are without before you do anything is already having that impact, and it's already, your aura is already interacting with the space's aura.
Well, even if you try to come in gently, right? You can imagine a person who like interprets, like even you just coming and seeing how they live. It's like they feel a lot of shame, and then if you say anything, they interpret this as a strong moralizing instruction to them, even if an accusation, right? Even if it wasn't, it was just an observation on your part. So there's like these layers and layers of stickiness, and that's basically what defines a hell realm, is that every dimension is snarled up such that there's like very few or no degrees of freedom to like start to clear like even a little bit of space.
It's like a Gordian knot almost.
Yes.
And so I guess like the first steps are to show up and then to like deal with the effects of you existing in this space.
There's a great sutta where a bodhisattva goes to one of the hell realms, and the demons are tormenting him. They're like tearing at him with like their tools and stuff and telling him all sorts of terrible things and screeching. And the bodhisattva is a bodhisattva, so he just keeps preaching dharma at them. He's just explaining, oh yeah, like you're doing this because you're suffering, and here's how suffering works. And he continues expounding the dharma, right? Because that's what you do in hell. And then a higher ranked demon like walks by and overhears what's happening, and he goes, oh shit, get this guy the fuck out of here. He's gonna ruin everything.
Interesting. And then that's the guy like, I guess you have the conversation with, like, you've moved.
Well, yeah, alluding to what you were saying, that even your presence is changing the situation for them, right? Even a person who's a bit more awake, just looking around, observing things, is affecting the situation, and that can be agitating.
I mean, I feel like I like occasionally walk through public spaces and like see a person arguing with someone else, and was just the like my witnessing. And the like witnessing, maybe I see them say a couple sentences, and then I'm also perceiving like a little bit deeper, like what are their motivations and what are they really feeling? And that like projection of that applies more complexity to each of them, and then they feel a little bit more complex, and then they feel a little bit more seen, a little bit more whatever. And I'll walk away, but like hopefully something changed in them, like a little spark of extra complexity or extra opportunity just by walking past. That's the dream anyway.
Yeah, that feels like the effortlessness The effortless. I don't know what that's called.
The practitioner will rain Dharma on all beings like a cloud rains down on the plains, I believe. On the 10th Bhumi.
So it might be effortlessness that is the trailhead for you, actually. That you might be avoiding effortful, compassionate action.
Interesting.
Wait, what?
Say that again.
I was saying it might be a trailhead for investigation for him, because if the system is accentuating the effortlessness of it, there might be some shadow material in effortful expressions of compassion, right? And seeing, oh, maybe effort means I'm not doing something right, which is an interesting frame, but it is also just a frame, right? So it's worthy of investigation.
I mean, I just heard you say the phrase shadow material. I'm like, what are your favorite ways to find shadow material?
To go hunting for it.
Yeah, like, how do you help people find their shadow material? Obviously, we want to be gentle and kind about it. But...
Well, usually you don't need, like, usually it's just laying around out in the open. But if you do need to go hunting for it, the people that you still feel tempted to judge is usually one of the best ones. There's no shortage of them. And they're usually pointing to something that, how did that book put it? I think Eastern Body, Western Mind has a thing on this. You are attempting to dismiss their experience by judging them because something about their experience is incredibly painful. So judging is a strategy. Doing that.
Like, okay, I heard the sentence and it's just not penetrating so much. Attempting to dismiss their experience by judging them.
Some part of their experience, some part of their way of being.
Yeah, interesting. I don't usually think of judgment as a defense mechanism, but obviously, yeah.
It definitely, like, I definitely use it as a defense mechanism, but also, like, sometimes I need that defense.
Right, of course.
Or, like, somebody's being mean to me, I want to be like, okay, I'm gonna, like, judge you. You're not a good person right now, or you're not doing good things, and, like, that lets me keep my sense of self, and my sense of I'm a person, and I don't deserve to have bad things happen to me.
Well, there are, so you see bad things happening, and maintaining a sense of separation from that is protective, right? Oh, I'm seeing this horrible thing and I'm having this reaction, but I'm still okay. Like, I'm over here, I'm safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I'm the one doing the judging, therefore I'm like a step away from. Yeah.
And more generally, that's how all of it's co-created, right? So if you judge a lot, then you are afraid of being judged because you don't want to be on the other side of that. You're trying to always be on the good side of whatever duality you're setting up.
Like a oppressor-oppressed dynamics, or you're picking your side that you're comfortable with. We were talking about that yesterday with the family constellation, I think it was called, where you have the rescuer, the oppressor, trauma triangle, and everybody's kind of moving to the roles that they're comfortable with, which is usually rescuer because the other people don't show up.
Different people should. It's tricky. Like, I guess I just don't know enough people who will own up to being a persecutor. So, are you familiar with the drama triangle?
Yeah, I think it's because it doesn't feel like persecution from the inside. It feels like they're defending something that's more important, like an abstract principle from the inside.
Right. Yeah. There's just like the other two. You can own up to being a hero on the inside, and you can own up to being a victim eventually on the inside. Or, like, you can be the victim as the receiver of stuff from the persecutor without the bad side, but to own up to, like, I'm the bad guy is kind of a tricky thing to do. Or like maybe it's just our society today is that people don't like currently don't like doing it. Give us a couple of years and we will re-own our persecutors and we'll start oppressing each other, having fun with it.
If you're not willing to admit that the thing that you're suggesting has trade-offs, then you're going to want to erase the experience of whoever's on the crap end of the stick for
Right.
your chosen set of policy prescriptions.
Right.
Mm.
Right. Who would want to be a persecutor? Like,
Yes.
well, there's probably something today that needs to be re-owned there. And I think I see the same thing with the rejection of narcissism. Like, narcissists will probably often become the persecutor in the triangle. And so we like to erase their experience and pathologize it and then try and brush it away under the rug, because that's a safer way to deal with it than to think, oh, that person's just kind of like selfishly getting what they want in a way that I can't, that I'd like to be able to do. Like, that sucks.
Well, I think people perceive the bottomless hungry ghost nature of the narcissistic pattern, and they instinctively do not want to contribute their energy to a giant energy leak in reality. It's not infinite, of course, but like the normal way of interacting with things is that they're infinite. So
sorry, that sentence just had a lot of weight in it. The normal way of interacting with things is that they are infinite. That feels like it's potentially got a lot of juice.
That's the standard David Chapman thing, right? It's all flavors of eternalism. Because the normal thing the personality matrix is trying to do, the reason it was generated in the first place, was in order to try to stabilize an inherently unstable stream of experience. And so it wants to, so the best stability would be things that are actually permanent. So it does whatever abstraction it needs to do, whatever Rube Goldberg machines and whatever highfalutin abstractions, to generate something that from its current perspective seems like it might be eternal in some way, whether that's a principle or whatever it is. And then it can use that as a building block, right? As a safe building block. And then if you've done that and then you've built up a bunch of load-bearing material on that, and now countervailing evidence comes in that threatens that foundation, it's going to be much easier to just dismiss that countervailing evidence than to rebuild the entire personality matrix. So you just become the sort of person who doesn't like certain things, and those things happen to be the things that are threatening to the foundations of the personality matrix.
Convenient.
So almost like if you don't like something, then there's some sort of load bearing experience or something you built your personality matrix around. Can you more define and like bring out what is a personality matrix, or how do we see those?
So it's different. So different societies have different theories of personality, either tacitly or explicitly, and different psychological theories sort of imply different personality theories. And a personality theory is going to be whatever that society regards as an unchanging aspect of people's experience. And you can see how that's actually like co-created, right? Because the society will build up scaffolding to help people keep those things stable and steady. And they'll have varying levels of social technology to work with potentially destabilizing forces coming in. So for instance, if a society doesn't have any kind of different stages of life for the personality matrix to actually move through at least some change in a stable way, well, then you'll get all sorts of pathologies, right? So currently we don't have that in the West. We have very poor shifting from childhood to early adulthood, and then shifting from that to being older. Very, very poor and fractured social technology for working with those transitions. And so everyone's sort of thrown into rolling their own, and then you wind up with a lot of existential crises, and then the people's reaction to that and various negative side effects. But more generally, yeah, having sort of socially recognized roles, and then things like Big Five, where we're obsessed with whichever aspects don't change very much over your lifetime. Now, if you're contemplative, you eventually gain access to levers where like, oh yeah, you can actually just move those things, right? The Big Five doesn't change for a normal person very much over their lifetime, but you can in fact alter it with concerted effort. So then
Okay.
you start to see personality. You start to see through personality view, as the Buddhists would put it. Personality view is usually the term that is used as the translated term.
Personality view, as in like these things that we've been talking about. Like
Yeah, the
seeing
view
world.
of a stable, lasting self with stable preferences and stable whatever.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting, because I do feel like a lot in the, like, I guess, regular world, people do tend to be very solid about categories of things and ways and that, and then when you move into like this world of like the Buddha, it's very, well, there is no constant except for change or something. And you get like, there is no I. So there is no I to have these qualities. And then it's a very, like, it's a huge jump to destabilizing, I think.
So just a quick note, I usually like to attempt to do something with this whenever it comes up. I do believe that the not self, no self is a red herring and a slight misinterpretation of what's going on. It's a very popular trope in the West. Closer version, we could go into it. It's a whole rabbit hole. The easy one is something like, the self certainly doesn't exist in the sort of naive way we usually believe it does. Now, the question of the underlying metaphysical reality of the self, famously, the Buddha actually said that this was a malformed question on the basis of several misunderstandings. But yeah, so his position was that if you hold a view of no self, that's actually an error, in the same way that holding a solid view of the self is an error.
I mean, that makes sense to me. It is neither self nor no self. I also like to add in here the I think it was Chongring Trungpa proposed that you need a strong self before you can dissolve the self. And actually, like in the West, we have strong egos, strong selves. That's the like healthy psychology, is like having a strong ego and like strongly reified yourself. But then a bunch of people don't make it there, and then hit Buddhism, hit dissolving their self, and get in this very weird territory where they haven't fully reified a self to fully dissolve a self. It makes for weird and strange experiences that are very confusing.
Yeah, this is I believe the translation is attempting to deconstruct the boat when you're halfway across the river.
Right. So it's not self and not self. Something in the middle.
Well, being agnostic, right? Being like, well, I don't know. I haven't checked. I don't know what's going on down there.
Well, or maybe it's a bit of each, different moments. Yeah, I'm also curious, like the way you describe personality is almost like as a floating construct away from reality, right? You've built the map, but surely part of our personality is formed by literally our biological experience, like our physical experience. The way we crashed into walls when we were a little kid probably helped to form our personality. Like the way our parents treated us when we were a little kid, we like bashed our heads against it, and again formed personality matrices. Not that they should be inherently good or something, but like those things point, like those personality facets point to a true nature of reality of like what happened to me. Like it's not completely dissolvable and removable. It's actually like it's got to have something. Like if I try and speed up my heart rate too much, eventually I'll give myself a heart attack, right? There's got to be some like limits in my psyche or limits to my personality, right?
Well, you haven't checked, right?
Right.
Like you don't know if you would die.
There's a limit.
But like it is reasonable. You probably would die, right? At least from our perspective, right? And we don't know if that's a good or a bad thing in the ultimate metaphysical sense, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, like arbitrary things happen.
Obviously, that's what you're saying.
And it's coming to see those things as semi-arbitrary, right? It's just causes and conditions, right? Like you happened to be born in this way and have these types of experiences, and that shaped you. But in this, we already knew from childhood development studies that if you give children a game that has an element of randomness, the ones who happen to do well the first few times will be positively inclined towards that game, and the ones who don't will be negatively inclined towards it. And then later on, as they build on those sorts of experiences, they will report that, oh no, this preference is really mine. Like I really, and they'll when you ask people reasons why they like things, they'll confabulate, they'll generate reasons, but it's clear that it's not causally related to the actual factors. People don't say, well, I was good at it right away and other people smiled at me, so like now I guess I'm a surfer.
That happens to me now all the time when I'm like trying new stuff. If I do notice that if I do well at the beginning, then I like to do it
Winner,
more.
loser.
And otherwise, like I just like, fuck this, I'm out.
And people have different learning rates, right? Like different they are drawn towards different rates of reward to optimize their sort of learning rate over their activities.
I mean, I can imagine someone getting too much reward, getting bored of the game and finding a game that is slightly more intermittent or something like that. Just like, you know, if you had a button like a Candy Crush, right? You push the button and like it like explodes the screen, like you winner, extra diamonds, extra diamonds, golden diamonds, other golden diamonds, right? And it's just a bit too much. Eventually you'll be like, I want to play a game that actually has difficulty. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. Now might be a good time to wrap up, actually. We've been talking for like 2 hours.
Yeah, I do have a thing to get to, but
Cool.
But this was great.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, and thanks for chatting to us and sharing jhanas and core states. I have to think more about, like, is there a different way I can fit? I mean, I guess jhanas and Brahma viharas don't quite like sandwich into each other, so maybe jhanas and core states don't merge. Yeah. All right.
All right. Well,